حاملا معي المودة والصداقة.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. President Michel Aoun emphasizes he will not accept any violations against the Constitution during his term and assures he is keen on preserving the Lebanese rights. Prime Minister Saad Hariri says the Palestinians' right of return to their homeland is one that will never be alienated. And British MPs approved the first stage of a bill empowering Prime Minister Theresa May to start pulling Britain out of the EU. President Michel Aoun emphasized he will not accept any violations against the Constitution during his term and assured he is keen on preserving the Lebanese rights. In a meeting with Lebanon's ambassadors, Aoun said he will use his constitutional powers to preserve the rights of the Lebanese, their aspirations and hopes. The president was recently criticized for a stance he made over the debate on an election law for the parliamentary elections. He said if he had to choose between extending the parliament's term or vacuum, he would definitely choose vacuum. Progressive Socialist Party leader MP Walid Jumblat, however, slammed threats about vacuum at the parliament as unconstitutional. Prime Minister Saad Hariri says the Palestinians' right of return to their homeland is one that will never be alienated. Speaking at a conference entitled Comprehensive Census of Population and Housing in Palestinian Camps and Gatherings in Lebanon, Hariri said, quote, "The whole world should be aware of how much the Palestinians are suffering in Lebanon and how much the Lebanese are suffering too," end of quote. There are around 450,000 Palestinians registered in Lebanon, with an estimated 65% of them believed to be living below the local poverty line. Palestinians live in Lebanon's 12 refugee camps with limited access to the local labor markets. Marada movement leader Sleiman Franji blasted Lebanon's ruling team, saying they aim to strengthen themselves at the cost of others. Franji's remarks were made after a democratic gathering delegation met with him to discuss the aspects of Lebanon's new electoral law. The Marada chief added, quote, "We support any fair voting system that is just to everyone and doesn't abolish our presence," end of quote. He expressed belief that the Progressive Socialist Party was subject to elimination. Foreign Affairs Minister Gebran Bassil has called for the representation of the Lebanese diaspora with 6 parliamentary seats. Speaking at the opening of the Lebanese Diaspora Energy Conference in Johannesburg, South Africa, he said the 6 parliamentary seats would represent the diaspora in every continent, adding that not only are the Lebanese diaspora maltreated in the current electoral law, but also those residing in the country for not having a system that achieves equality. Bassil reiterated that Lebanese expats were an added value to the countries they reside in, urging the Lebanese government to properly implement the citizenship law, without which, he said, Lebanon would lose its uniqueness. Coming up next in our program, Romania's business and trade minister resigns after anti-graft protests. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. Violence has erupted as Jewish settlers were forced to leave the largest outpost of Amona in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Jewish settlers occupied this land in the east of Palestine's city of Ramallah in 1996. But in 2014, Israel's High Court ruled the 42 families in Amona were living there illegally and the land belonged to Palestinians. Several of the 42 families living on the hilltop opted to go without a fight. Others, however, joined by hundreds of Jewish settlers from neighboring areas who traveled to the hilltop to show solidarity, confronted the thousands of police units sent to evacuate the outpost in defiance of the court order. Moving on to the UK, British MPs have approved the first stage of a bill empowering Prime Minister Theresa May to start pulling Britain out of the EU. The bill would allow the government to trigger Article 50 of the EU's Lisbon Treaty and formally begin 2 years of exit negotiations. A second and final vote in the lower house is set for next week. More details in this report.
Ayes to the right, 498.
The Brexit law clearing its first legislative hurdle. Wednesday's vote paving the way for UK Prime Minister Theresa May to launch formal divorce proceedings from the European Union by the end of March, as she'd promised. Britain's Supreme Court ruled last week that May could not invoke Article 50, which launches the process, without Parliament's approval. She won it after 2 days of impassioned debate, which showed Britain's largely pro-EU establishment still reeling from the shock of June's popular vote to leave the bloc. A first batch of amendments will be debated next week. Then the bill has to pass through the upper house, the unelected House of Lords. It's not in the bag yet for May, but few expect her plans to be derailed.
Romania's Business and Trade Minister has resigned over a government decree decriminalizing several graft offences that triggered nationwide protests. Florin Gianu, Minister of Business, Trade and Entrepreneurship, announced his resignation, calling it an ethical decision. The decree was adopted by the cabinet late on Tuesday evening, barely a month since the Social Democrat-led government of Prime Minister Sorin Grindeanu took power. Romania's top judicial watchdog has filed a constitutional court challenge to the decree, which will take effect in 10 days unless blocked by a court ruling. US President Donald Trump reportedly ripped into his Australian counterparts in a phone call last week, castigating an Obama-era refugee deal he later described on Twitter as dumb. The Washington Post said Trump abruptly cut short the fiery conversation after criticizing the agreement to resettle people kept in Pacific camps, sparking a war of words with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull after the report surfaced. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence described the environment inside the White House as very dynamic as he reflected on Trump's administration's first few weeks in office. During an interview with PBS NewsHour's Judy Woodruff, Pence talked about his excitement about President Donald Trump's nominee to serve as Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. The 49-year-old federal appeals court judge could restore the court's conservative majority and help shape rulings on divisive issues such as abortion, gun control, the death penalty, and religious rights. Let's hear him.
To resort to the so-called nuclear option.
I'm hopeful that he doesn't. I'm hopeful that he doesn't. The president and our entire team are committed to supporting Judge Gorsuch's nomination. But I do believe that when you look at those first-term nominations of President Clinton and of President Obama, none of those were filibustered. All four received broad bipartisan support, and all were considered and resolved in the Senate in a matter of 60 to 70 days. And I have to tell you, it is having been a governor and now having the privilege to serve as vice president, it heartens me to know the passion that President Trump has for ensuring that our system of immigration, the way people can come into this country, is operated in a way that puts the safety and security and the well-being of every American, regardless of their race or creed, first and foremost. Well, obviously there's a history of and a tradition even within the State Department for dissenting opinions, and I can tell you, working with President Trump closely and seeing the way he operates as a leader, he's always interested in a broad range of opinions. But make no mistake about it, we want in this administration people that share the President's vision. I'm very comfortable with the fact that there's only one person in charge in the Trump administration, and that's President Donald Trump. But we value Steve Bannon's around President Trump. I can tell you, Judy, it's very dynamic. He leads by asking questions. He asks for input from everyone in the senior circle and a lot of people outside the circle, and then he makes decisions. I think the action that people are seeing in these early days is just the beginning. I think there's two messages coming out of these. The President made it clear that he expected the Congress, while they take action to repeal the most corrosive elements of Obamacare, the taxes, the mandates, the things that are suppressing job creation and driving up the premiums for working families across the country. But he made it very clear that in the very same breath, he wants to see the Congress bring forward the kind of replacement plan, both through legislation and will support with executive action, that will create a better health care system that expands consumer choices and drives down the cost of health insurance for every American. I think there's two messages coming out of these early days. I think as time goes on, it's going to be more apparent to more Americans that President Trump is going to be president for everyone. America, for a stronger America, for a more prosperous.
And still in the U.S., the University of California at Berkeley went into lockdown amid a violent protest over a planned appearance by a right-wing speaker, with demonstrators throwing firecrackers. School officials said on Twitter after the protest erupted that the speech by far-right Breitbart news editor Milo Yiannopoulos had been cancelled and that the campus was on lockdown. Take a look. Director and tribesmen behind the movie Tana talk about their Oscar-nominated film and the indigenous people who starred in it. Jason Mansoray reports.
Set in the South Pacific, on the island of Vanuatu, feature film Tana is up for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. It was made by Australian documentary makers Bentley Dean and Martin Butler. After first visiting the island of Tana, Dean said he was looking for any reason to return.
Essentially, I was looking for an excuse to go back all that time, and had a brief window of opportunity between projects, and convinced my wife to come live with me and with my two small children and try and make a film collaborating with the local community.
The Australian film focuses on a love story between the two lead characters, Wawa and Dane, and used genuine members of the indigenous community on the island.
The chief asked the chief, which was our decision, but maybe it was confusing to the directors, which Bentley will explain later. And the salmon plays the salmon, the father who is there, Lungai, plays the father of Selim, who is in real life the real father of Selim, and etc., etc., except the laugh, that which is something that we, to be honest, we act. About laugh story.
The lovers were cast along the line. So again, it was everyone agreed basically that the lead male was the best looking guy in the village, and everyone agreed who the best looking guy in the village was.
On February 26th, at the 89th Academy Awards, an Aussie film set on a Pacific island is up for one of Hollywood's biggest accolades.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. President Michel Aoun emphasizes he will not accept any violations against the Constitution during his term and assures he is keen on preserving the Lebanese rights. Prime Minister Saad Hariri says the Palestinians' right of return to their homeland is one that will never be alienated. And British MPs approved the first stage of a bill empowering Prime Minister Theresa May to start pulling Britain out of the EU. Those are your top stories in English for today. I'm Linda Tamim, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.
حمل معي المودة والصداقة